Welcome to Bits and Pieces Quilting. Today we are going to have adventures with half square triangles, so stay tuned. Hi, I'm Michelle, and today we're going to make more baby quilts with the fabric that Sue asked me to work with. And it turns out that all of these quilts are based on half square triangles. I can't wait for you to see the differences, and we've got a few lessons to learn along the way. So let's dive right in. So to start off the second part of this challenge, I thought I'd just take a moment to remind you of where we started and where we're at now. So these are the bins of fabric, and the challenge is to make as many baby quilts as possible. And would you believe that we already have 6 baby quilts made? 6! And look how much fabric is left. I still have 3, this is sort of falling over here a little bit, 3 different bundles of fat quarters. I have this beautiful rainbow selection of solids that I pulled out at the beginning that I'm still working on a plan for. There's still a ton of these 4.5-inch squares, as well as some white 4.5-inch squares buried under here. Some neutrals in both bins, as well as all of these other fat quarters. So there's still so much potential with this collection of fabric. As a reminder, I got all of this from my quilting friend Sue, and one of her very favorite charitable contributions is to make baby quilts for northern communities. So that's what I'm helping with, using Sue's fabric, using her sewing machine and all of her tools while I wait for my shipment of my own supplies to arrive back in Canada from Australia. So for the first project, what I think I'm going to do is something really simple. These are 4.5-inch squares, and there's a whole ton of them here. And I think what I'm going to do is pair them up with the white squares and make some half square triangles. And from that, we will have endless layout possibilities. So from a 4.5-inch square, I think I'm going to be able to, and a white square, I'll be able to get 2 half square triangles that'll square up to 4.5 inches. So I'll probably look to make maybe a 10 by 12 layout or so. So I'll need 120 squares in order to do that. Well, 60 squares in order to make 120 half square triangles. So I think that's where I'm going to start. And then I'll continue to brainstorm for other ideas for all of this fabric. I've completed my fabric pull, so let me show you what I've got. This pile here I'm calling my Bright Brights, and there's probably 80 or 90 squares in this pile. So I think given the dimensions, I'm probably looking at needing 60 squares. So that's probably not quite enough for 2, but it's more than enough for 1, and I'm hoping ultimately to get 2 out of this. And then over here, I have this sort of lighter selection. I was looking at all of these and thinking, oh, aren't they so pretty? So these are my regular brights, and these are the Bright Brights. So with these lighter ones, I have this piece of yardage that I think I might make the background for this one. This pale purple and pale green in here I think looks really nice with these softer colors of the brights. And then I have these squares and a few pieces of extra background fabric, which will need to be cut up in order to go with these. And then would you believe there is still a ton of squares left in this box? So if that first pile of Bright Brights isn't quite enough for 2 quilts, I'll probably come back to the pile in the box to get a few more. And I may have to rush out and buy a little bit more background fabric just to make enough. But I think I'm going to launch into making half square triangles, and then we're going to get to layout, which is going to be super fun. But I've got a lot of half square triangles to make in the interim. So I'm going to get to it. This is the first layout of the 143 half square triangles. I think it looks really cute. I ended up going with an offset layout because I should have thought of this, but a lot of the really symmetrical half square triangle layouts require an even number of squares. But I had planned this to be 11 by 13 rows, which is not an even number. So anything that starts with a center medallion and builds out from there wasn't going to work with the number of blocks that I had. So I opted for this off-center layout, which I really like. I think it's really dramatic, and I love the contrast between the colored rows and the background rows. So I'm going to sew all of these together, and I have another whole stack of them, so I will figure out another layout. As we can see, there are tons and tons and tons, and I'll put a few up here, of options for half square triangles. You could make half square triangle quilts for the rest of your days, and every single one of them would be different. There are so many ways to lay out these units. So I'm going to pick up something completely different for the next one. But before that, I need to get these off the floor so we have some room to move around. So this is the first quilt all sewn together. In the video, I originally thought I was going to make it 10 by 12, but I ended up having enough pieces to make it 11 by 13. But as I mentioned, I probably should have thought of the implications for that, because so many half square triangle patterns start with some kind of a medallion of some sort in the middle, and you can't really do that with an odd number of squares. So that's why this one has an offset setting. I think it still looks really good, but my original plan wasn't to make it offset. I love the bright colors. It turned out really well. And as I said, I had enough squares to make a second one. So let me put this one down and I'll grab the other one and show you how that one turned out. And this is the second one. Same number of blocks, 143 in an 11 by 13 setting. And same problem as the last one, without an even number of squares, a little bit tough to get a center medallion. So I saw this pattern in a photo, and I thought I'd try that spiral design from a central point, an offset point in this case, but still a spiral design. So a lot of it still looks really similar with the rows of colored fabrics and background fabric, but a different design, and I thought it turned out really, really well. So unlike the Bright Brights, this is the Brights. And I only had enough fabric, enough of the background fabric to make a 10 by 12 quilt. So this was my opportunity finally to do that center medallion. And so I love the star shape that's in the middle of this. And then the same rows of print and background fabric to round out the rest of the quilt. But I really love that central focal point. And those soft, soft colors I think turned out really, really well. So another really cute quilt, tiny bit smaller, but babies come in all shapes and sizes, right? I have decided what to do with these beautiful rainbow solids. And if you can see, these aren't quite solid, but I had no greens that were solid. So we're just going to sneak those in there in order to round out our rainbow. But have you seen these quilts? And I'll put a few photos in here that I've just scooped off the internet. I have always admired these quilts, and I think I'm going to try and tackle one on my own. This is about color placement. The blocks are really simple. They're hourglass blocks, and I'll take you through quickly how to make those, but they're not hard to make at all. They're basically just half square triangles put together again and made into another half square triangle, and you get your hourglass blocks. But I think the magic will come from color placement. And over the course of this baby quilt challenge, I have learned that I need about 7 to 8 fat quarters to make a nice sized baby quilt. And so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in this pile. But if I'm going to make half square triangles and then make half square triangles again, that's 2 sets of sewing. So I think I'm going to need just a little bit more than I've used for the other ones. So in looking at the collection of fabric, I have a few other things over here that I think I'm going to add in. So there's no purple in my rainbow. So I think I'm going to add some of these purples. And I know I'm moving away from the idea of working with just the solids, but when you've got a limited selection and you're trying to achieve a certain look, I think this is what I'm going to do. And then these pieces were in the collection of 4.5 inch squares, and I'd like to use them as well. So I think that's going to dictate my starting size. I'm going to cut all my squares to 4.5. And then I have a few other pieces here that I may or may not work in. Let me see if I can do this without putting too much shadow on the screen. A nice darker purple, a nice darker blue, some more yellows and oranges. So this is what I'm working with. So I'm going to cut all of these up into 4.5 inch squares, and then I will show you how I think this is going to work to lay them out to get the effect that we're going for. I've cut all my squares and they're all here in a beautiful, beautiful rainbow. Most of them are solids, but there's a few not solids in here just to round out the colors that I need for my rainbow. So in looking at some of these quilts online, I can see that they generally mix the warm colors together and the cool colors together. So you don't see the orange mixed with the red or the yellow mixed with the purple, not very often. So I think that's going to be my next step, is to start to pair these up into pairs within their warm and cool color family, except in here with the yellows and the greens. I'll probably blend some of the yellows in here with the oranges and the blues, or in the oranges and the reds, and then a few of the yellows in with the greens, and maybe into the blues. Just when I look at some of these quilts online, this is the way it looks like it's been divided. And we'll make our first set of half square triangles. And then, of course, we have to make the second set of half square triangles to get the hourglass blocks. But I'm going to start by pairing them up. I thought I'd take a second to explain my randomizing approach. So these were lined up on my table. These are lined up in their rainbow pile, kind of the way that they're laid out here now. So I took the first pile of red and I've drawn the line diagonally across the center. I don't know if you can see that with the pencil. I've drawn that line on these red. And then in order to randomize it, I'm going to take one of these and then I'm going to pull one of these off the pile and pair them up. And then back to this original pile, and one of these, and one of these, and carry on like this through all of these piles until I run out of the original pile. And then I'm going to move to the next, this one, whatever's left here, I'll draw the diagonal line and pair them up. And then I'll move here if there's any left and carry on that way. It's the best way I can think of to make it an organized approach to randomness. And as I work through and as I run out, then I'll start to bring in the greens and the blues, because as we saw, I'm going to mix some of the yellows in with those greens and blues. And I'll just keep moving it along that way until every single block has a pair that's not too far off of its own color. I have finished making all of my half square triangles. These are most of the warm colored ones with the start of the cool colored ones, and then those ones are sitting over here, the cool colored ones. And as I was looking at my reference pictures, and I'll put a couple of them up here again as a reminder, I noticed that most of them aren't actually hourglass blocks. Most of them are actually made just with half square triangle blocks. So I think instead of making hourglass blocks out of all of these, because that would mean doing another set of half square triangles with them, which makes them even smaller, and then squaring them up, of course, I think I might just square these up and then build my very kaleidoscopic rainbow colored baby quilt out of just these pieces. So unfortunately, I had pressed all of these seams to one side in order to nest them together to make the hourglass blocks. But if you watch my channel, you know that I'm all about pressing the half square triangles open. So I think I'm gonna go back and press all these seams open and then just square up these blocks and then lay them out into a chaotic but beautiful, I hope, design. And this is the multicolored one that was going to start out, if you remember from the video, as a bunch of hourglass blocks. But then I realized most of my inspiration pictures were of half square triangles. So I ended up with a much larger quilt than I was originally expecting. And I think it's so dramatic. And these are also just half square triangles. This is all about color placement. And so I laid out on my table about half the quilt, sewed it together, and then kind of hoped for the best as I laid out the rest of it. In terms of planning, I probably should have had a smaller number of reds and oranges and yellows, and maybe a higher concentration of the blues and the greens. but I tried to put a little swirl of that red and orange and yellow down through the middle with the blues and greens to round out the edges. I think it's really dramatic and really powerful, and it's just simple half square triangles. So I hope you like this one too. Thanks very much for watching this video on my adventures with half square triangles. I think these baby quilts turned out so cute, so different, and they were a ton of fun to make. Thanks again, and don't forget to make the most of your fabric bits and pieces.